Good morning, everyone. On behalf of faculty members of Nida Business School, I would like to welcome you to the 4th Nida International Business Conference 2019. With this year's theme of transforming business to the future, this conference aims to prepare academic researchers, practitioners, and entrepreneurs to the changes in the new frontier of emerging technologies and new business models. Our full-day event brings together academics and industry professionals from various disciplines to network, exchange, and share their latest ideas, also with the experiences. First and foremost, I would like to begin with the first session with an opening remark from Professor Kampon Panya-Gomet, the President of Nida. Please welcome Dr. Kampon.
So, good morning and welcome to the National Institute of Development Administration, also known as Nida. And welcome to the 4th Nida International Business Conference 2019, which is hosted by Nida Business School. Let me start by providing you with a brief introduction to our university. Nida is a leading national institute which fosters leadership and knowledge for universal change. It was established in 1966 to follow His Majesty King Bhumibol vision of advancing Thailand development through educated and competent resources, and have been developing for more than 50 years. For the education of master degree and doctoral level, throughout its 50 years, Nida has been well established and recognized as one of the top-tier educational institutes in the country. And the personnel of institute comprised of the country's foremost staff of faculty and personnel. We also have the highest proportion of doctorate level instructor and academic position instructor in the country. In the term of research and academic services in various fields, they are well accepted both domestically and internationally, and Nida play a vital role in the nation development and policy setting in public and private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, even though Nida has a long history of prestigious foundation and status and well accepted reputation, but I think that we cannot take it for granted. Nida is going to become autonomous university, and as we all know that we are in the era of the disruptive education. For myself, I see becoming the autonomous university as an opportunity, not a threat, because I think we can use this opportunity to transform and redesign Nida to maintain Nida competitive advantage, right, in order to sustain the growth of the Nida in the future. We try to transform Nida through 3 keywords. The first one is excellence, the second one is inclusion, and the third one is connectivity. We try to drive or transform Nida to have the academic excellence, and also research excellence, and also operational excellence. And eventually, we want to have the physical and agriculture excellence. Right? And in order to achieve this such kind of excellence, right, we need the inclusion of all the stakeholders of Nida. And we also need to connect Nida with private sector, public sector, community, and also university, locally and internationally. So this is what Nida want to do, right? We try to transform and redesign Nida. The ultimate goal of Nida is we try to achieve what we want to do, as mentioned in the motto of Nida, which is wisdom for change. So As a host of the conference, we hope that you find the conference effective and that you take away a multitude of valuable insights as well as find some time to enjoy the many attractions of Thailand. We also thank the section presenters for their hard work on their research and for their efforts, from the submission process to making their arrangements and traveling to attend and present their research finding here today. And thank you to all of you to taking the effort to attend this conference. สวัสดีครับ
Thank you very much, President Kampon. Next is a welcome remark by Dean Viput Ongsakun, the Dean of Nida Business School.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to welcoming you on the Nida Business School International Conference. This is the fourth year with the theme of transforming business to the future. This year we have the morning keynote speaker. He is the president and CEO of AACSB International, Professor Thomas Robinson, and he will deliver the keynote speech in this morning. And for the afternoon keynote speaker, Professor Hiro Bala, he is a professor at the IS in the Kelly School, Indiana University. He will deliver the keynote speech during the afternoon session. And for the conference, the themes that we arranged, we hope that you can have many insights on how to transform the business in different sessions that you might enjoy and attend. So as a host, I would like to thank you for coming to join the conference for this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean Viput. Next, I would like to proceed with the first keynote speaker of our event, Dr. Thomas Robinson. Dr. Robinson is the President and Chief Executive Officer of AACSB International. His prior experience includes serving at the CFA Institute as a Managing Director to provide vision and leadership for more than 100 global team members. His current work at the AACSB International involves leading business schools around the world in engaging innovations to build impact to the society and business education. It's our great honor today to have Dr. Robinson with us as the first keynote speaker. Please welcome Dr. Robinson.
Perfect, thank you. So it's my pleasure to be here. I was actually supposed to be at a board meeting in the US this week when I got the invitation from Viput to be here. And I was actually here 10 years ago when you were first starting your Master's in Finance program and had an opportunity to speak to your students, and it was a fantastic event. And so I decided to cancel my trip to the US so I could be here today. And also another reason for wanting to be here is the topic of this conference about transformation. When I joined AACSB 4 years ago yesterday, there was a lot happening in the world, in business education, in technology, and we took a fresh look at the vision and mission of the organization and decided we needed to rewrite it. And so the vision today for our organization is transforming business education for global prosperity. We can't keep doing things the way we did them in the past. So I was actually an accounting professor for about 15 years. I left that environment 10 years ago to come into nonprofit management. And when I go around and I look at business schools around the world today, they're doing things quite differently. And we need to keep doing things differently, because if we keep doing the lectures via PowerPoint that we did 20 years ago, We're not keeping up with the pace of change. There's a lot going on. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about today, is what's going on and what business schools need to do to transform themselves so that they will survive in this environment. So I'm going to talk first about some trends in business and society in general. I'm going to then talk about trends specifically in business education, some opportunities that AACSB has identified for business education, and then what business schools need to do to transform themselves or future-proof the business school for the world that we're living in today. So first, for trends. Things are changing rapidly. They're changing in technology, they're changing in business. We can no longer do things the way we used to. We've got the fourth technological revolution. That's going to cause a lot of upheaval. The jobs are going to disappear, but new jobs are going to be created. So we need to adapt and be agile in this type of environment. So I'm going to talk about each one of these in general. So we hear a lot about a VUCA world: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, but that doesn't capture everything that's going on in business. We also have a global environment today. Businesses are becoming more and more global. Unfortunately, countries are not necessarily doing the same, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also have an extremely competitive environment. There are a lot of ways of getting education today. One of the things that was mentioned in my bio is I spent 7 years before joining AACSB running education globally for the CFA Institute. The CFA in some parts of the world, for example in the UK, is accepted as the equivalent to a master's degree in finance. So there are a lot of alternatives for students today. Now, we at CFA actually formed partnerships with schools like Nida so that students could earn their master's and get the CFA at the same time. So it's competitive, but it's also an opportunity for collaboration. But today, learners have a wide variety of opportunities to learn. They don't necessarily need to get a degree. They might get a certification. They might do continuing education. How many of you know that LinkedIn has bought an education company called Lynda, L-Y-N-D-A? It's a company that provides education to companies for internal training and development. Imagine if LinkedIn were authorized to issue degrees. That would be a real competitive threat for business schools. But it's already a threat. LinkedIn is basically a resume, if you think about it. They have so much data, they could actually guide people based upon their career history about what's their next educational opportunity. Imagine Amazon or a similar organization that has their star rating system. Imagine if Amazon decided to get into the rating system for professors. And so your individual lectures were actually rated on Amazon, and people could choose the best professors from around the world. That's a potential competitive threat, also perhaps an opportunity for collaboration. But take it one step further. What if one of these organizations did get authorized to issue degrees and stacked individual professors' lectures on top of each other? So you go on Amazon, you pick the best professors, you take the courses you like, and somebody says, okay, we're going to stack these all together and give you a degree. So it's a very competitive environment that we're operating in. So let's talk about trends. One of the first major trends is demographics. People are getting older, they're living longer, and they're working longer. So that's a significant change. But at the regional level, there are significant changes or differences among regions. In particular, in some parts of the world, the college-age population is declining fairly rapidly, while in other parts of the world, it's increasing fairly rapidly. People are also increasingly moving to urban centers. So today, about 50% of the world lives in urban environments. The UN estimates that in a couple of decades, that'll be 2/3 of the world. So people are moving and migrating around the world. They're working longer, they're tending to specialize early in their career, and there's more of an interest today in public service. Millennials want to do well, but they want to do good at the same time. So we need to factor all of these trends in. So let's look at some data. So the UN projects out population. They look at fertility, mortality, and they estimate based on the data what the population is going to look like decade by decade. And they do this for 50 years out. So I'm just looking at over the remainder of the current decade in their projections. If you look at the population of those getting ready to enter college and in college, that population over the remainder of this decade, about another 7 years, is only going to grow by about 4%. That's not per year, that's cumulatively. Over that 8-year period, the college-age population is only going to grow by 8%. If you look at adult learners, aged 25 to 59, that's going to increase 2.5 times faster. So there's a much bigger opportunity for adult learning today than there is for college-age populations. Let's look country by country. On the left-hand side, this is the growth in that pre-college and college-age population with the countries that have the highest potential growth, and on the right are those with the lowest potential growth, in fact, negative. What do you notice about the countries on the left? Where are virtually all of them located? Africa. And that's actually what's driving the overall numbers. If you actually look over the next couple of decades, the college-age population in Africa is going to more than double. So there's a huge opportunity there, but there isn't the infrastructure to deliver education there. There are a number of business schools. We're working with a number of business schools in Africa, but the capacity is not yet there. There's a lot of work to be done. If you look on the right-hand side, you'll notice a lot of Asian countries, where the population over the next 8 years is going to decline between 15 and 20%. So there's going to be a significant shift in where students are coming from. If a business school is relying purely on domestic students, they're going to have to live with those trends. They may have to downsize. If they're in Africa, they're going to have to bulk up. But if you're going to look at more attracting a global student population, then there are opportunities to look at what parts of the world the growth is going to be and how you can attract those students to study in your business school. So let's look at what's happening in technology. Technology is changing. When I was a professor, we had Blackboard, but it was largely used to put our course syllabus on, to post our PowerPoint slides, and maybe have some discussion boards. But today, people have a variety of ways to learn. They can go to Lynda, they can do an online MOOC, they can do a variety of video courses online. So technology is enabling education to occur at somebody's desk. It used to be that people would like to sit through an hour and 15-minute class. Believe it or not, there are some people that enjoy that. Today, though, people want more bite-sized pieces. They want shorter programming. And so we have to figure out how to make this work for us. It turns out MOOCs were thought to be very disruptive and going to put a lot of schools out of business. That actually hasn't happened. That people haven't figured out the business model for MOOCs necessarily, except that it actually provides a way of schools collecting a lot of data on what works and what doesn't work, and perhaps attracting students to their institution. Today, there's a huge trend towards blended learning. And this is where I think the biggest opportunity is. So my home office is in Florida. I have an office in Singapore, an office in Amsterdam, because we're a global organization. Weekly, I have phone calls with my team in both of those other offices, and I have periodic video calls with them. But every once in a while, I have to pick up and go to that office and meet with the team. So currently, I'm actually living in Singapore and working directly with the team there and meeting with my team in Florida via audio and video. Audio is fine, but video is better, but live is even better. So there's nothing like interpersonal, in-person interactions. Video's not the same, audio's not the same. If you think about how your students are going to work when they get out there in the world, they're going to work very similarly. Sometimes they're going to be working face-to-face, sometimes over video, perhaps over virtual reality is the direction we're going, perhaps via email and audio. You need to make sure that students are getting all of these experiences while they're learning. The better blended programs, what I'm hearing from them is that there's actually a higher quality of technologically enhanced interaction if students have an opportunity to work together live first. So for example, if students get together at the beginning of a program and they work on projects together for say a week, They get to know each other. They get to know people's body language. They get to understand how they think, how they feel. Well, later, when they're doing things remotely via video, via a learning management system, the quality of the interaction is better. When you're sending someone an email and you've actually worked with that person for a little while in person, you better understand the meaning behind their email, and you don't necessarily take it at face value. So there's a lot of opportunities in blended learning. The biggest thing that's changed since I left teaching is experiential learning. So when I was teaching, I used primarily the case method because I taught financial statement analysis, but largely it was a lecture format. But when I'm visiting business schools around the world today, the level of experiential learning is incredible. So people are working on real life cases in the classroom, perhaps companies that actually have a business problem they want solved where they're putting student groups together. Today, experiential learning and blended learning is very critical to the learning environment. We're seeing experimentation with bots. So in Georgia, I think it was the Georgia Institute of Technology, actually created a teaching assistant that was a bot. And students didn't know it, but they would send an email for help from the teaching assistant, and artificial intelligence would compile an email back answering their questions. And the students weren't aware they were dealing with a bot. So all of these things, on one hand, create challenges for us in business schools, but they also create opportunities. They create opportunities to put some things in a technological environment and do richer things in the classroom. So we can move basic knowledge acquisition onto Blackboard or Coursera or some other type of learning management system. So in the classroom, professors can be working with students to help them solve problems, which will better get them ready for the future. So that brings me to the most important part of technology, and that's automation and artificial intelligence. So there was a study that was done by some professors at Oxford, and they created an algorithm to look at what occupations around the world could potentially be automated out of existence. They looked at 700 different occupations. I'm just giving you a sample of 2. The first occupation has a 99% probability of being totally automated, and that job will cease to exist. The second one has only a 0.03% chance of automation. So what do you think the 99% is? Accountants, okay. Pretty darn close, okay. And I'm a former accountant, okay. You'll notice I'm no longer doing accounting. Within accounting, could you get a little bit more specific? Auditing, okay. It's certainly a possibility. If you actually look at public accounting firms today, they're looking as much for people with data analytics skills as they are for accounting skills, debits and credits. And in fact, blockchain could eliminate debits and credits, potentially. But I don't think auditing is going to go away because there's still some professional judgment there, but the nature of auditing is definitely going to change, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and give it to you because you guys got really close on your first guess. Tax preparers. So in some countries, someone was talking about it at dinner last night. In Singapore, I haven't yet filed my taxes in Singapore, I'm currently living there. I understand you just go online and they have all your data and you just press a button to say whether you agree or disagree with their calculation of your income taxes. So you no longer necessarily need a professional to do that. It's becoming much more automated. Well, what do you think the 0.03% is? Physician. All right, you guys are really good on your first guesses. So it's definitely healthcare. Okay, let's get a little more specific. Some things that a physician can do can be automated, so they have robotic surgery arms now and things like that. But within medicine, what do you think is least subject to automation? Physiotherapy, so you're really close. So, mental health workers, okay? So more psychological therapy. So if you think about it, that makes sense. You need to have that human touch, that empathy. You need to be able to react differently than a machine. Imagine if you called the suicide hotline and instead of getting a person, you get a robot that says, press 1 if you're depressed, press 2 if, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very clear that there are some jobs that are going to go away, but not all jobs are going to go away. There's still that need for that human judgment, that human interaction in a lot of jobs. If we look at some broader data, this is from McKinsey. McKinsey estimates that it's only 5% of jobs that are going to disappear, that are going to be totally automated, all right? But 60% of jobs are going to be at least partially automated. So perhaps 30% of the jobs. So a lot of what an auditor does is going to be automated. So they're going to have to figure out what value are they adding, what can they do more at a higher analytical level that can't be done by machines. It also varies country by country. And so this is the same study, McKinsey. McKinsey estimates that while that's 30%, using currently available automation, this is not technology that hasn't been invented yet, but using current technology, there's about 1.2 billion employees who are going to need to be retrained because the jobs they're currently doing are going to disappear. The countries that are going to have the most impact are Japan, India, China, and the US. In China and India in particular, more than 50% of the activities there can be automated. So that's going to change significantly what the employees or workforce in those countries are going to be doing. So let's take a look at what else is changing besides technology in business. So when I first started in the investment area, so I practiced before I became an academic, we used to think about blue chip companies, so companies that have been around forever like Sears, all right? Today, we have new companies that didn't exist a decade ago. A lot of these formerly blue chip companies that we used to think about have ceased to exist. Jobs are also changing. Many of the jobs that students are doing today didn't exist even 5 years ago. The jobs we're actually preparing students for today don't yet exist. So how do you prepare somebody for a job that doesn't exist? You don't necessarily know what knowledge you need to impart on them, but you have to impart on them the ability to engage in lifelong learning. So how are they going to learn new skills as things change? How are they going to be able to analyze a situation and reach a solution? So it's more about higher level skills. The ability to analyze a situation, the ability to solve a problem, to find a solution. It's much less about knowledge and much more about application of knowledge, because knowledge is out there on the internet already. You just Google it. We also need to prepare people for change. People's jobs are going to change. We need to prepare them for that. How do they transition? How do we keep them upskilled in order to compete in this environment? And for business schools, how do we keep curriculum and programs up to date? We'll go through some statistics later. There are estimates out there that 50% of universities and 50% of business schools are going to go out of business in the future. I don't think it's quite that dire, but if we don't change our programs and curriculum, and if we're still teaching today what we were teaching 10 years ago, then we're going to be among those that do go out of existence. So we need to keep up to date. So I started my career actually in public accounting, and when I started in public accounting, the workforce was a pyramid. You started as a staff accountant, and then if you survived the first couple of years, you became a senior accountant, then you became a manager, then a director, and then a partner. And it was up or out, and the pyramid got smaller and smaller near the top, so a small number of partners and a very large number of staff accountants. This is actually from one of the big 4 global accounting firms today. This is what their workforce looks like today. So the traditional workforce that I worked in is only about a quarter of their workforce today. They also have a virtual workforce. So those are people that are sitting in another country where the auditor is doing their audit of a company, say, in London, and they're collecting data during the day, they're shipping it off overnight, so the analysts are working on it overnight and send them the results back in the morning. They also have a contingent workforce. These are people they bring in for special projects where they have some unique knowledge, skills, and abilities, perhaps, and they're not working for just one firm, they're working for many consulting firms. And you bring them in on a project basis, the so-called gig economy. We see even more in things like Grab and Uber. It's the gig economy. And then today you have the digital workforce. How do you think the digital workforce is different than the virtual workforce? These are robots, okay? So the auditor, the accounting firms also have bots now where there's a certain process that needs to be done, a certain analysis that needs to be done. They email the data and the answer comes back immediately. So artificial intelligence is answering it. So the workforce today at most companies looks quite different than it did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. The knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need are also changing. And they're also different depending on whether someone wants to be an employee or they want to be an entrepreneur or work in the gig economy. So this is just a compilation of typical studies out there that are done in terms of what people need today. And if you actually look at it, functional knowledge or product and market knowledge is still there, but it's not necessarily the most important thing. What is important is collaboration, teamwork, communication, problem-solving skills, people relationship skills. These are the things where humans can add value. So it's no longer just about imparting or disseminating knowledge. It's about creating these analytical and problem-solving skills and the ability to work with people that we need to impart in the classroom. So globalization. If you look at companies around the world, companies are becoming more and more global. Even a small company through the internet can have customers around the world. The problem is countries are moving in the opposite direction. So countries are becoming more nationalistic. They're making it harder for people to work or trade across borders. They're making it harder for people to immigrate and move to another country to either study or work. So this is a real challenge. If we want to keep up with business, as business schools, we need to continue to be international and globalize. But it's hard to do that in the face of what's happening with countries around the world. And so that's a big challenge. What we need to do is we need to train students to work in that global environment, but also to work in the local environment, startup enterprises, organizations that may be helping the local community, but also train them to be global at the same time. We can't, unfortunately, solve the political problem, but we can certainly continue to point out the importance of market structure and not throwing up barriers to trade. So if you look at it, the data shows this. So this is world exports as a percent of GDP, continues to increase. It's at a record high. This is migration around the world. So if you look, it's not just migration from one continent to another, but it's migration within continents. People want to pursue opportunities wherever those opportunities are. So there's a lot of migration or interest in migration around the world. Students today want a global experience. When I was in college 30 years ago, we didn't have the opportunities that students have today to go on an international program, to go away for a semester. Those opportunities abound today, and students want more and more of those types of opportunities. This is AACSB enrollment data, and this looks at the number of undergraduates that are enrolled across borders, not in their home country, and that's continued to increase. MBA has been flat, the number of global students going across borders to pursue the MBA, and I'll explain more about the MBA data a little bit later. But specialty masters have been growing dramatically. Students wanting to cross borders to get a specialty master's degree continue to increase. All right, so that brings us specifically to business education. So when I joined AACSB about 4 years ago, one of the first things we did is everything you always do when a new person comes into an organization. You go through a strategic planning process and use all the tools in your toolbox, including things like a SWOT analysis. And you look at what business schools do really well, where their weaknesses are, where their opportunities are, where their threats are. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but I'm happy to provide the slides to you individually or a Word file with our SWOT analysis. But business schools today are really good at a lot of things. They're really good at pedagogy. They're doing a lot of experiential learning. They have not been resting on their laurels. They have been changing over the last decade, and that's a good thing. They're really good at research, and this is something that's changed over time. So if you actually go back, when business schools were first founded, anyone know when the first business schools were first founded? Didn't know you were going to have a quiz today. 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 200 years ago? Little over 100, okay? So the first business schools started to appear in the late 1800s, depending on how you define a business school, but certainly a business school within a college or university was in the late 1800s. AACSB was founded 100 years ago for that very reason, because before that, business was largely taught through apprenticeship programs or through trade schools. It wasn't taught in a college environment. The reason it came into a college environment was we wanted to teach business as something more like a profession and not just a trade. It's something where you're looking out for the impact that business has on society. So you take some liberal arts courses, you take some philosophy, and you combine that with the business skills so that you have a broader set of knowledge. And in those days, we didn't have PhDs in business. So who taught business classes? Business people. They came into the classroom and taught. And they did a really good job of importing that practical knowledge. But in the 1960s, business schools were very much brought under the microscope by the business community and by other parts of the university. And they said business schools are not rigorous enough. They're not doing really heavy-duty research and creating new knowledge. They're simply disseminating knowledge. So what did business schools do starting in the 1960s? They basically got really good at doing research. And today they do very rigorous research. And they're really good at finding a problem, creating hypothesis, and solving those problems. So we've done a really good job at that. The problem today, though, is a lot of the business community is looking at the research we're doing and saying, I didn't want you to solve that problem. Here's my problem. I want you to help me solve it. So on one hand, we're really good at doing research. On the other hand, sometimes we're criticized for sitting in an ivory tower. These things create opportunities. There's an opportunity to us to work with the business community, not only to create new ideas that may not have an impact for 20 years, but to help them solve business problems today. So I'm going to go through some data, and I'll come back to what we can do working with business a little bit later. So this is AACSB accredited business schools around the world. We collect enrollment data. And oftentimes when I'm asked about business schools, the only question I'm ever asked is about MBA programs. But if you actually look at business school enrollments around the world, 75% of the enrollments are at the undergraduate level. So if you look bottom right, which is the global data, about 75% are undergraduate, and then it's pretty much equally split between generalist masters like the MBA and specialty masters like a Master's of Science in Finance. All right? If we look at the trends over the last 5 years, it's pretty dramatic. So this is the global data. Over the last 5 years, undergraduate business enrollments have increased by 10%. So that population has been growing in spite of the demographics. Specialty master's program increasing by almost 20%. MBA program only by about 3%. And again, that's not 3% per year. That's 3% over a 5-year period. So very flat enrollments in MBA programs, and then about a 7% increase in doctorates. If we look at it by region, you'll notice the region that's had the most explosive growth in specialty master's programs has been Asia Pacific, with about a 35% growth. Fairly modest growth in the EMEA region, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, because they've had specialty masters for a lot longer than the Americas or Asia Pacific, but this is an increasing trend. Now, I've heard a lot of people say that schools are creating these specialty master's programs to fill seats that are no longer being filled by MBA students. So you're basically creating a program to attract more students. But this is not a demand that business schools is creating. This is a natural demand based on what's happening in the environment today. And so I'll show you, this is independent data of business schools. So I ran the CFA program for about 7 years before I joined AACSB. And this is looking at the same period. The candidate growth in the CFA program, which is a specialty program in finance, grew by about 20%. So that's growing at the same rate. So why is this? So think about it today. How many types of financial instruments are there? Derivatives, foreign currency transactions that need to be done. It's very complex today versus what it was like 30 or 40 years ago. The level of knowledge you need today to practice in finance or accounting or data analytics, you need to have deep specialty knowledge. And you're not going to get that from an MBA program. On the other hand, the specialty programs like a Master's of Finance or a CFA program are not going to provide you with management or leadership skills or knowledge, right? So if you think about the life cycle. When someone first gets out in the workforce and they're working as an analyst or they're working as an accountant or they're working in marketing, they're going to need to have a good deal of specialty knowledge. But then as they progress through their career and they start to lead teams and they start to lead organizations, they're going to need management and leadership skills. And so I view this again as an opportunity and not a threat. These specialty master's programs are not necessarily a threat to the MBA, because the same people that are doing the specialty masters today are going to need to come back for more education in the future as they start to lead teams and lead organizations. And I'll talk more about that later. So we got together with a couple of other organizations recently and surveyed millennials who were either in college or had finished college and were currently working. And we asked them about their likelihood of enrolling in the next 10 years in either an MBA program, a specialized master's, a business program perhaps that was a certificate program but not formal, or a non-degree executive education program. And you'll notice the statistics are very high. Most people realize that when they finish their undergraduate degree, their learning isn't done. They're going to need to come back for additional education in the future. So, future opportunities. So when we went through and did the strategic planning process, and we looked at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, one of the things we were looking for, where are the biggest opportunities for business schools going forward? So I want to talk about each of these opportunities. I'll list them first. Co-creators of knowledge, I'll talk more about that. Hubs of lifelong learning, catalysts for innovation, leaders on leadership, and enablers of global prosperity. So if we talk about these individually, we'll start with, let's actually start with catalysts for innovations. So today, a lot of students want to be entrepreneurs. When I go in a classroom around the world, I'll ask students, how many of you want to start your own business? And typically about half the class will raise their hands. We know that most of them are not going to start their own business because there's a high capital requirements in some cases, there's an opportunity cost, so they may start working for a while and then later become an entrepreneur. But there's a great deal of interest in entrepreneurship and innovation. Business schools have the ability to help people understand how to create new products, how to bring them to market. A lot of the new ideas are coming up in arts and sciences, in the engineering school, in the medical school, but they don't necessarily have the expertise in how to develop and market an idea and how to create a business plan. So we think there's a huge opportunity for business schools to serve as that catalyst for innovation across campus and in their local community. So forming incubators where they help incubate companies, new not-for-profit organizations within their communities. So there's a huge opportunity to be a catalyst for innovation. There's a huge opportunity for co-creation of knowledge. So instead of solving problems on our own, sitting in our ivory tower, we can work more closely with the business community to figure out what their current problems are and get teams of faculty together and graduate students to help solve those problems. I'll give you a really good example. This is in Rotterdam. They have something called the Smart Port. The Smart Port is a consortium of companies, business schools, universities, law schools in Rotterdam who look at the major economic driver there, which is the Port of Rotterdam. And the companies get together and they say, here are our current problems, and the faculty get together and say, okay, I'm going to get together a team of students to help solve that problem. And the companies provide the funding. So if you think about it, the academics are doing research that they know somebody is going to read the paper. as opposed to a paper they're going to publish that may or may not be read. So it's a huge opportunity there. The other aspect of co-creation of knowledge is working with the business community to co-create your curriculum and to co-create your programs. So instead of creating them in a vacuum, most business schools today are collaborating with business advisory councils to help develop the content, and we think that can continue. There's an opportunity for business schools to provide leadership outside of business. So in the nonprofit sector, in the governmental sector, in the political sector, to help inform people so we can get away from these nationalistic trends. The last two I want to spend a little bit more time on. That's enablers of global prosperity and hubs of lifelong learning. So if you remember, when I said AACSB was founded 100 years ago, when business schools started to be formed within universities, the whole idea was to have something that was more of a higher calling, more professional, less about making money, and more about what we're doing for society. And we've actually been quite successful. So if you look at the Millennial Development Goals, we now have the Sustainable Development Goals, but previously we had the Millennial Development Goals from the UN. And it looked at things like raising people out of poverty, getting more people in the education system as opposed to young children that were out working instead of learning. And we actually did a fantastic job. Over the course of 15 years that the UN had the Millennial Development Goals, 1 billion people were raised out of poverty. The percentage of people living in extreme poverty around the world went from 47% down to 14%. That's a remarkable improvement. If you actually look at the data, though, and you look at what countries had the biggest improvement, they were countries with high levels of trade and investment. So high levels of business activity. So business activity raises people out of poverty. We need to do a better job as AACSB and business schools about talking about the contributions we're making to global prosperity. And we need to continue to work with organizations like the UN on their new Sustainable Development Goals, which are about pushing the numbers even further. So we think this is a huge opportunity for business schools so that people don't think of us as you're educating the top 1 or 2% who are going to be accumulating the most wealth. It's not just that. It's how do we not just help ourselves and help our families, but how do we help society and how do we help the world? So there's a huge opportunity for us to reframe what we're doing. There's a huge opportunity for lifelong learning. At some points in your career, you're going to need deep specialty knowledge. At other points, you're going to need to have broad skills. And it may change over time. So I started my career as an accountant. I had a master's degree in accountancy. Today, if I decided to retire from AACSB and go back into accounting, do you think I'm qualified? No. I would need to go back and probably get a master's in data analytics. I'm going to need to go reskill myself and take a deep dive in another subject. That's going to happen. It's going to happen often. People are going to need to reskill themselves perhaps every 5 years. So you may take a deep dive in a subject. You may do that for a while and something else may come along. You need to take another deep dive. So we need to think of our students now, not as students, but as lifelong learners. Instead of thinking about students and alumni, think of it as a continuum. And how do we provide them with education throughout their careers? How many of you are familiar with the Eagles song, Hotel California? Okay, so you can check in, but you can never check out. Once you start learning, you're going to need to continue learning for the rest of your life. So we want to think about how do we keep connected with our alumni so that they think of us in terms of how we can continue to enhance their career through the rest of their work life. How do we work with the companies they're working for to help provide leadership talent, management talent for them on a continuing basis? All right, what else is going on? Stackable qualifications. So today, there are qualifications, degrees, certifications that stack on top of each other. So the CFA, I mentioned a few times, the CFP, they're all examples of this. You can't earn a CFA or a CFP or some of these professional designations unless you first have a college degree or a business degree. So they stack on top of it. We're going to see this increasingly. We're going to see in the future degree programs that stack on top of certification programs. So someone that does a CFA and has deep specialty knowledge in investments, when they start leading teams, they need leadership training. They may want to come back for a master's that gives them credit for what they did in their certification, so that they only need to take the additional courses they need to fill out the needed knowledge, skills, and abilities. So we need to think about how to stack things over somebody's lifelong learning to create their next level of qualification. So, and then the last point, which sort of ties these two previous ideas together, we need to think about training our business students more as professionals. And it's not just about education and experience, but it's also about ethics. We need to train them to be lifelong learners so that when they get out there in the workforce, they're able to continuously reskill themselves. So, now to the bad news, all right? There are a lot of folks out there, Clayton Christensen, there are a number of others that are forecasting that, particularly in the US, that half of colleges are going to go out of business. And we're already starting to see it. We're seeing some consolidation. We're seeing some liberal arts institutions that have gone bankrupt. We're seeing some business schools that have to be folded into other business schools because they've turned out to not be successful. And I'm not talking about well, I'll name one, Thunderbird. So Thunderbird had a fantastic international reputation for a number of years, but they were floundering financially, and now they're part of Arizona State. So you're seeing a lot of this going on in the world. So how do you avoid being part of the 50% that goes out of existence, all right? You're going to need to transform your business school. Or another way of putting it is future-proofing your business school. So what can you do today to ensure that you're not one of those schools that's going to go out of business? How do you transform yourself? So first, I think they need to embrace the concept of lifelong learning. But you can do this in a couple of different ways. One is to offer a spectrum of learning opportunities that includes degree programs, certificate programs, alliances with the business community to provide them with learning and development for their employees. Or it could be that a school embraces lifelong learning and stacking, but decides to choose to focus on a particular niche. So for example, I might want to focus on a niche where I offer an MBA that stacks on top of a CFA. Or I may want to focus on executive education and be the best school in executive education. But the key is understand that today it's about lifelong learning. And you either choose a portfolio of programs that delivers that, or you choose a particular niche that contributes to that lifelong learning environment. You need to have a very strong partnership with business. And this is not just a business advisory council that meets a few times a year. This is co-creating knowledge with the business community, both in research and in curriculum. It's a very deep relationship and not a superficial relationship. You need to leverage technology. You need to work technology into your programs. And how do you move things that are not value added onto a technology platform so you can do things like experiential learning in the classroom? So along with that, you need to have active, experiential, and project-based learning. Imparting knowledge is not enough today. You need to be teaching people how to apply knowledge and how to develop new skills over time. We should be agile and innovative. We can't just use the same programs year over year. We need to continue to create new programs. We need to foster professionalism. We need to make sure that students understand the importance of ethics and how they fit into society, that it's not just about making money. We need to get rid of silos. So if you think about the world's biggest problems, as an accounting professor doing research, my research was on earnings management, I'm going to solve some small problems, but I'm not going to solve the world's biggest problems. To solve the world's biggest problems, you need people working in an interdisciplinary fashion. So you need to have people from different disciplines, even outside of business, that are contributing to the research. So we need to try and get rid of silos within business schools and within universities. And lastly, they need to be local. So they need to be global and local at the same time. They need to be preparing students either to work in their local community or to work for a global organization. So in summary, there are an incredible amount of challenges out there, but there's actually a lot of opportunities. And as I travel around the world and I look at what's going on at business schools, I'm actually energized by the level of activity and the level of change that's going on. We're not just sitting on our laurels. We're actually creating new programs. We're doing more and more with the business community, but we need to keep it up because there are going to be some business schools and some universities that will cease to exist if they just stick their heads in the sand and try and ignore what's going on. So with that, do we have time for questions?
We have about 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay, great. So questions on anything I've talked about or anything else related to business education?
So what would be your advice to professors, like in terms of how we can adapt? So that's one question. Another question is your advice to, let's say, practitioners, like what kind of skill sets they should be looking from business practice?
Yeah. So the first question, from a faculty member standpoint, there's a couple of different strategies. There's certainly going to be a need for people to be doing very high-level theoretical research that maybe will win a Nobel Prize and do something great for society down the road. Somebody needs to be doing that research. But there's an even greater need for companies to solve current problems. And so I think of it from the business school perspective and the business education ecosystem as a portfolio. We need to make sure that we're providing all of those opportunities. So there's, for an individual professor, there's a couple paths. They can choose what their contribution is going to be and see how they fit into that local or that overall ecosystem. So they can go and they can focus on research and be really good at that, or they can focus on consulting and working with the business community, helping them solve problems. What we need to make sure is that in our reward systems and in our accreditation standards, we're allowing for that flexibility. So what we need to do as an accreditor is we need to make sure that there's a flexible faculty model that makes sure that we're doing everything we need to do across the spectrum. But an individual faculty member is going to get to pick and choose. Where I think the biggest opportunity is going to be in faculty members that can bridge practice and theory. That's going to be the biggest opportunity. There's certainly going to be a lot of opportunities in research, but they're going to be fewer in pure research orientation than there would be in these bridging, okay? So.
I have a question, actually similar from what Dr. Bala just mentioned. I think right now there's a large gap between business and academic in terms of what business people do and what we do as a researcher. Totally different things. I mean, when we measure the performance of the faculty member, we look at the publication that, in a basic research that has to list in the FT 50 journals or top journal. And when we publish, very few people read our paper, maybe like reviewer and editor, and I just talk with Dr. Bala. You might end up with having 5 people reading your paper. That's how we measure the performance of the faculty member all around the world. But the thing is, CEO, they don't read the management side. CFO, they don't read the journal of finance. I mean, how are you going to bridge the gap here? I mean, because what we do and what the business do are totally different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple of ways of bridging the gap. One is by working with them to identify problems, but also for the research we're currently doing, a lot of what we're doing is actually valuable to the business community, but they're not going to read that paper in the Journal of Finance. So we need to take that research that we're doing and reframe it in a more user-friendly format. Okay, for the business community, what does this mean to you? How can you act on it? So when I was at CFA Institute, we had one of the top 10 finance journals, the Financial Analyst Journal, okay? When we sent that out to our 100,000 CFA members around the world, and I would be visiting them in their offices, and I would see the Financial Analyst Journal sitting on their desk in the plastic wrapping. They'd actually never opened it, okay? So what we started doing was we required that every time someone submitted a paper and it was accepted, that they write a 1-page summary of what's the practical implications of this, that we would put on our website and push out via social media. And a lot of business schools are doing that today. They're creating a brochure or a newsletter for the employers that they work with to basically translate the academic research in terms of what does this mean to the business community. The UK government now requires that as part of the funding for colleges and universities, they have to demonstrate that their research has an impact. And so the Chartered Association of Business Schools in the UK actually does this. They take the academic research and they create PDFs which summarize the research in a user-friendly manner and the relevance to business. So what we need to do is, for the research we're already doing, we need to get it out there in another format to the business community so they can make use of it. And when they do that, they'll see the value of what we're doing. But we also need to make sure we're bringing them into the discussion when we're identifying research topics. So we're helping to identify things that they're going to find of value. So a little of both. All right, did I use my 5? Thank you very much.
Next, I would like to invite President Kampon to give a present of the appreciation to Dr. Thomas Robinson. And thank you so much for the insightful talk, Dr. Robinson. So this is the end of our first keynote session today. We will have a short break with some refreshments. The session will resume at 10:40 for a paper sessions and presentation part 1. And the next plenary forum will start at 12:30.